Response to King Yaqub's video, Lunar Sabbath Nuked, Part 10, First Fruits Wave Sheaf. Hiram yashra'al, servant of Yahuwah and of the Master Yahushua HaMashiach, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad in the captivity, greetings. Well, brothers and sisters, this is the 10th and final part of this series. This is concerning the First Fruits Wave Sheaf, and this is the part many of you have been waiting for, because this is the part in which I told you that I'm going to prove to you that Aviv 15, what we know as the first day of unleavened bread, will always be the seventh day Shabbat, every year and without exception. I also told you that these last three videos go together, because the last three parts go together, rather, because parts 8 and 9 lay the foundation for what I'm going to bring out here in part 10. So let's review those real quick. In part 8, we talked about the heart of the earth. The points I made were that there's no clear scriptural link of the heart of the earth to either the grave or the underworld. The second point was that the Messiah's experience in the 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth paralleled Yonah's experience, which included suffering and distress. And then part 3, we see that the count of the 3 days and the 3 nights, according to the Messiah himself, actually begins when he's delivered over to the hand of sinners. And so at the end of that video, I spoke of how the heart of the earth is not the grave nor the underworld, but Yerushalayim is a much better candidate for the heart of the earth than the grave or the underworld, because that's where that he had suffered and died and rose again over the course of 3 days and 3 nights. So, part 9, we talked about the third day resurrection, talked about how it was not necessary for the 3 days and the 3 nights to be 72 hours or 3 perfect 24-hour periods. That's the way we count time here in the West, but that's not how they counted time. I made that point in point 1 of part 9. In point 2, I showed clearly how the Messiah was impaled on the preparation day, and he rose from the dead on the first day of the week. And then the third point I made was that you cannot scripturally interject another Sabbath in there and call it a high Sabbath, because there is no high Sabbath apart from the seventh day Sabbath. There is no special Sabbath even connected to the festival of Matzot, Feast of Unleavened Bread. The only special Sabbaths that we see in the Torah are connected to the festivals of the 7th month. So I made those points to you. And so what we're going to do is we're going to move on to the first fruits. And I want to read to you in Luke chapter 24. This was on the road. This was after the road to Emmaus experience, and after he had revealed himself to his Talmudim. And I'm going to read from verse 44. It said, "And he said to them, These are the words which I spoke to you while I was still with you, that all have to be filled that were written in the Torah of Mashah and the Nevi'im, or prophets, and of the Tehillim, the Psalms, concerning me." Catch this. "Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures." Verse 46, and said to them, "Thus it has been written, and so it was necessary for Hamashiach to suffer and to rise again from the dead the third day." So remember, we talked about his suffering, being delivered up to the hands of sinful men. That's the starting point. But I emphasize verse 45 where it said he opened their mind that they may understand the scriptures, meaning that this is something that could not be seen just by reading the scripture itself. It's something that you need the revelation of the Ruach HaKodesh for. This needs to be revealed to you of the Father. That's why he opened their minds that they may understand this, and that they may understand about how it was actually written that Messiah would suffer and rise from the dead the third day. So question, where is it written that he would suffer and rise from the dead the third day? Who's the prophet that prophesied that he would suffer and rise from the dead the third day? We don't see it written explicitly, but let me show you where we do see it written and what he did reveal to his Talmudim, because he had to open their minds to understand this. Now, let's turn to Leviticus chapter 23. We're going to look at the instructions for the first fruits wave sheaf. Verse 9 says, And Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Yashra'al, and you shall say to them, When you come into the land which I give you, and shall reap its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the Kohen, and he shall wave the sheaf before Yahuwah for your acceptance. On the morrow after the Shabbat, the Kohen waves it. And on that day, when you wave the sheaf, you shall prepare a male lamb, a year old, a perfect one, as a burnt offering to Yahuwah. And its grain offering, 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, an offering made by fire to Yahuwah, a sweet fragrance, and its drink offering of 1/4 of a hin of wine. And you do not eat bread or roasted grain or fresh grain until the same day that you have brought an offering to your Elohim, Allah, forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. So, the significant part I wanted to bring out, and we're going to revisit this. We're going to revisit, but remember now, the sheaf was waved, according to verse 11, on the morrow after the Shabbat. That's talking about the seventh day Shabbat, brothers and sisters. But let's turn to John chapter 20. Yochanan, John chapter 20. Now, this is after he rose. John chapter 20, verses 16 and 17. This is when he appeared to Miriam after his resurrection. Yahusha said to her, Miriam, and she turned and said to him, Rabboni, which is translated teacher. Yahusha said to her, Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father, but go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, and to my Elohim and your Elohim. So, he could not be touched yet, because he had not ascended to the Father yet. And we're told, even through extra writings, that he actually did ascend the first time on that day, and therefore he presented himself before the Father as the first fruits, because the Father had to receive the first fruits first before anybody else could. Because remember that when he met with his Talmudim, he allowed them to touch him, and to put the hand in the side and touch the nail prints in his hands. He was able to be touched then, but he couldn't be touched when he met with Miriam here, because he had not yet ascended. He was that first fruits wave sheaf that was presented before the Father. You know, even Paul in his writings, we realize that the letters are not scripture, but they can provide some help and interpretation to us. But even Paul in his letter to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 15, he explicitly calls the Messiah the first fruits. And so most people don't have an issue with that. Most people don't have an issue with realizing that the Messiah fulfilled the first fruits, that he was that wave sheaf offering that was presented before the Father. Most people do not dispute that. And so what I want to do is I want to go back to Leviticus chapter 23. And let's look at what's going on here. Now, before the instructions for first fruits, we have Pesach. Now, most of us understand that Pesach was a typology of the suffering and death of the Messiah. Now, the suffering in that we eat the bitter herbs with the Pesach lamb, and then the death, how the lamb was to be slain between the evenings on the 14th day of Abib. So most of us who are Messianic believers, we don't have a problem with that typology. Most of us Messianic believers do not have a problem with the first fruits typology of him when he was rose from the dead, presented before the Father, him being the wave sheaf, the first fruits. That is a very common understanding amongst us. But the point I want to make in point 3 is this. Not only was the Messiah a foreshadowing, not only did first fruits foreshadow the resurrection and first ascension of the Messiah, which few dispute amongst us, but he foreshadowed the third day resurrection. That's the most important point of this entire video series, brothers and sisters, that everything stands and falls on this point, that the first fruits foreshadow the third day resurrection. Okay, because remember now that Yahushua said that thus it is written that he would suffer and rise from the dead the third day. Well, where is it written? That he had to open their minds to understand the scriptures in order to see where it was written. It's not written explicitly, but it's written in typology, and the typology, which we all agree, most of us, about his suffering and his resurrection would be Pesach, and then also first fruits. But what we have to realize is that it wasn't just a typology of his resurrection and ascension, but the third day resurrection. And as we go back to Leviticus 23:11, it said, "And he shall wave the sheaf before Yahuwah for your acceptance. On the morrow after the Shabbat, the Kohen waves it." So the sheaf will always be waved on the morrow after the Shabbat. And if first fruits is to be a foreshadowing of not just the resurrection and first ascension, but the third day resurrection, then, brothers and sisters, the sheaf of the first fruits must always be waved on the morrow after the Sabbath, the 7th-day Sabbath on Aviv 16. So this is what it'll look like. The first day, this is what actually happened when Yahushua was impaled. The first day, we have Pesach lamb being slain. The second day, we have the Shabbat. And then the morrow after the Shabbat, the wave sheaf is offered, and Yahushua fulfilled that by rising from the dead. The third day, ascending to the Father the first time. And so, brothers and sisters, there we have it, the Shabbat being the 15th day of Abib. And just to give you a historical reference to this. Now, this is Josephus. I don't put a whole lot of stock in history, and I advise anybody to look at multiple historical references, but nonetheless, this is a reference. Now, look at 249 here. I'm going to read this to you. It says, "The Feast of Unleavened Bread succeeds that of the Passover and falls on the 15th day of the month and continued 7 days, wherein they feed on unleavened bread." Now, 250 here. It says that, "But on the second day of unleavened bread, which is the 16th day of the month, they partake of the fruits of the earth." So he's making reference to first fruits on the second day of unleavened bread, which is the 16th. So, once again, brothers and sisters, that if what he is saying is true, then the second day of unleavened bread is the wave sheaf, which is Aviv 16. And so the day before would be the Shabbat. And remember now that the wave sheaf is always to be waved on the morrow after the Shabbat, which would be Aviv 16. And if it is to perfectly foreshadow the third day resurrection of the Messiah, not just the resurrection, but the third day resurrection, then it always must look like this right here every single year. Because if you do it the traditional way, brothers and sisters, if you just do the every seventh day Sabbath, and successively without interruption, then you're going to break the typology. You're going to end up typifying a second day resurrection, a fifth day resurrection, a fourth day resurrection, a seventh day resurrection. It will not be in keeping with what Yahushua said, that it is written that he would suffer and rise from the dead the third day. Third day resurrection typified by Pesach and first fruits. Remember now, the Talmudim, if they had to have their minds open to understand this, then so do we. This is a revelation from the Ruach HaKodesh. This is not something that's plain in black and white. That's why their minds had to be open. Once again, third day resurrection. First day, Aviv 14, Pesach. That's when he was impaled. Second day, Shabbat. And then according to the command, as it is written, on the morrow after the Shabbat, the sheaf is waved. That's when Yahushua rose from the dead, ascended the first time to be presented as the first fruits before the Father on the morrow after the Shabbat, proving that the Shabbat was Aviv 15, the year he died, and that if what he's saying is true, thus it is written that he'd suffer rise from the dead the third day, then it must be like what I'm showing you there every single year. And if it's like that every single year, without exception, brothers and sisters, which we even see indicated by what Josephus said. Like I said, Josephus is not scripture, but at the same time, sometimes historical references help, and I would advise you to even search for multiple historical references. But, brothers and sisters, if what Josephus said was so, and if it was always Aviv 16 when they waved the sheaf, then guess what? It was always Aviv 15th when the seventh day Sabbath came in. And the only way to do that, brothers and sisters, is if the Sabbath count resets every single year at the beginning of the year. There's no way in the world to do that if you're keeping the Sabbath every 7 days in succession without any type of reset or any type of interruption. And so, brothers and sisters, that would eliminate the every 7 day count to the Shabbat, the Roman Saturday Sabbath. It just does not fit with the scriptural model here. Now, you have those who keep the Enoch calendar, and they reset their Sabbath count once a year. And so this here would be in keeping with the lunar count, but also with the Enoch count. But where I disagree with the Enoch count is that the 15th of the first month will always be Shabbat. So Shabbat will fall on the 8th, 15th, 22nd, and 29th of the first month. But guess what? In Exodus 16, it fell on the 8th, 15th, 29th, 22nd, and 29th of the second month. The only way you can do that, brothers and sisters, is by resetting the Shabbat count every new moon. Once a year won't do it. So that there even eliminates the Enoch count. So, brothers and sisters, like I said, these last 3 videos especially, go back through them if you didn't understand everything I said. Because I just proved to you how Aviv 15 will be the 7th day Shabbat every year. And so that will not work in the way that most of you all are keeping the Shabbat, the traditional Jewish Roman Saturday Shabbat. it just will not work in the scriptural model. It just does not square with the scriptures. Brothers and sisters, I hope I've explained myself well enough in this video series. If you have any questions, please message me. Thank you for your patience, especially those of you who went all the way through this series. So with that, I will say, Shalom.